Okay, well that's us just after 8 o'clock, so we'll just make a start. So I'll thank you all for coming on to our webinar tonight, much appreciated. Just a little bit of housekeeping to start with. We are recording, just to make you all aware of that, so the webinar will be available at a later date. Due to the format tonight, if you have any questions, if you use the Q&A box down on the bottom, put your questions into there. If there's any other questions you like the look of, if you can give them a thumbs up and it pushes them up the list, and we'll work our way through them. So without further ado, I will just do a brief introduction of our speakers. So we have Grace Reid, who is our NSA Scottish Region Coordinator, who has been with us for just over a year now and sadly has done most of her events on this kind of format rather than getting out and about. We have the McNees, Hazel and Robert, who are our Scotch Sheep hosts, who we should have been going to see today. But after what Robert said, it's maybe a good thing because things are a wee bit damp. And we have Brian Richardson, who is the UK Head of Agriculture with CYBG PLC, and they'll all be speaking to us later on. But I'm going to hand over to our first speaker for tonight, which is Grace.
Thank you, Jen. And just for a wee introduction to who you don't know what NSA Scotland is, we're the Scottish branch of the National Sheep Association, and we represent all Scottish sheep farmers and crofters throughout Scotland. So we want to ensure that there's a stable and resilient sheep population and that it's fit for purpose and well respected, not only in the UK, but also globally. Not only for meat production, but also producing quality fibre, environmental attributes, ecology, landscape and resource use, but also the cultural and rural employment. So in terms of policy, there's many opportunities ahead of us, but with that come the inevitable challenges. Young people nowadays need to have the confidence in an industry which has been built upon tradition and inherited skills over many years. So in the light of new agricultural policy, it's up to us all to ensure that we have a voice in shaping agriculture and the future. So now is the time to step up and make a difference, as there may be like a significant amount of time before it happens again. So us as NSA Scotland, we will be engaging in meetings with the new Cabinet Secretaries and Ministers that have just been appointed. So in terms of working with the government, you might have seen that last year we were trying to get an answer to all the consultations that have been going on, the FOC, animal transport, animal welfare and transport, and also the gene editing one earlier on this year. And we also tried to do things in terms of animal health and welfare, so disease control strategies, and also highlighting the impact of rewilding. That's been a very important topic and a hot topic lately in terms of seagulls, lynx, and all them things that are just around the corner. So we, as NSA, decided to do a predator survey last year. So the results of that will be coming out next week. So keep an eye out on that. It found out that ravens, crows and foxes were the main three culprits when it came to predation on our flocks, which may not come to as much a surprise as many of you as others, but nonetheless, it's all still ongoing. Sheep worrying by dogs is also a very important topic. We at NSA have been trying to do a huge public awareness on that in this past 2 weeks. You would have seen that at the start of May, and also going forward we need to keep on making sure that that is at the forefront of the industry's interests, because it's getting worse and worse all the time, and lockdown has not helped that case. I mentioned rewilding lynx. There is a consultation going on currently in the Cairngorms. So we will be holding an event on Monday, the 7th of June for all sheep farmers and crofters to get their views and concerns across to the consultation partners, and also to have a more generalised chat and discussion around lynx and what that may hold in the future. So NSA Scotland, we're trying to get our communications up and going again, keeping an eye out next week for the start of our chairman's blog, where Jen has very kindly started to write a few things for us, and that will be published on a monthly basis at the start of the month. We also will have a policy update where myself or another member of the NSA Scotland team will be doing a video of what we've been getting up to over that month. And we'll also be doing a member bulletin for everyone on the website. So that'll be a PDF format where you can download and peruse at your own interest. And without the McNees or people like them, we wouldn't have our events. So we have Scotch sheep and Highland sheep, so you'll be able to hear all about Scotch sheep and look forward to attending to it next year. So we are your voice as members. We are your voice as the National Sheep Association. So we want to hear from you and ensure that Scottish policy is fit for purpose and that it is useful for you in the future. So that's about all for me, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have, and just get in touch with us at any time you want over anything.
Okay, thank you, Grace. That was really good of you. And hopefully, as restrictions and things start to ease, Grace will be able to get out and about and you'll actually get to meet her face to face. So I will pass on to Hazel and Robert now.
Let Robert start.
Hello, I'm not sure really what you want me to talk about tonight. Briefly, well, today was meant to be Scotch Sheep, they're rescheduled Scotch Sheep, and then I'm actually quite pleased it hasn't went ahead due to the weather we've had this last month. We've had a third of our annual rainfall has arrived in May, and there have been quite a few nights during May that we've had over an inch of rain. So the farm is actually pretty wet and sodden, and we've still a lot of cattle to go outside yet. Lambing has went fairly well. Ewes were probably leaner than normal, as we would have a 6 weeks to the winter, we would have covering with snow. So ewes had to come through a good chunk of the winter getting fed on hay and silage. But although they were leaner, they certainly did lamb well. Here at Overfinlard, we've been here now for about 9 years. So we have invested quite a lot in putting quite a bit of fertility back into the farm, and done quite a lot of buildings around the steading, and quite a lot of fencing as well we've done in the last 10 years, 9 years since we've been here anyway. We're situated just north of Dundee, right up on top of the Sidlow Hills, and we're farming between 800 feet and 1200 feet above sea level. So spring generally does arrive quite late here just due to our altitude, and we're easterly facing, so we're very exposed to the easterly airflow. So if any weather's coming out the east, we certainly do get it pretty rough here. The flock consists of 900 ewes, with 600 Cheviots, 200 blackface ewes, and 100 between Texel and Blueface Leicesters. And we also lamb 200 hogs, which we sell with lambs at fruit in the springtime. And the main purpose of the flock is to produce breeding sheep. So it's Cheviot mules and Scotch mules is the main focus. And all the lambs, we're able to finish them and sell them dead weight. And along with that, we have 200 pedigree suckler cows on the farm. So it's been a pretty tough spring for us. It's been quite challenging just due to the colder climate that we've experienced, and a lot of rain, certainly a lot more rain than what we're in the habit of having through May. So we're still got a lot of cows to go outside yet, just due to the climate we've had recently. But that's really a brief background on the farm. Disappointed we couldn't have Scotch sheep again, but at the same time, we look forward to having it a year from now.
Okay,
that's
thanks,
okay,
Robert.
Jen.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks very much. And hopefully we can have Scotch sheep in a year's time. That'll be really good. It's been a long time coming. So I'll just hand over to Brian as well. Oh, Hazel, yep.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say there would be a lot of tears, I think, if it had been today. I can tell you that.
Tears of excitement, I hope, Hazel. Yeah, just by way of introduction, Brian Richardson, I'm Head of Agriculture for Clydesdale Bank, which I'm sure many of you will have seen. We've recently changed our name and branding over to Virgin Money, but very much agriculture remains at the heart of the bank and very important to us. We've obviously, been tied up working in meetings like this for what seems like a long time now, but a highlight before that was certainly visiting Robert and Hazel's farm back in October 19, I think it was, which seems an incredible long time ago when we first started talking about the sponsorship. So very much looking to the event taking place when it can. It'll be a real highlight, and that visit was a real joy to see some great farming. The title this evening was The Challenging of Establishing Future-Proofing Sheep Farming in Scotland. And I think we're going to see an awful lot of change coming, and it can't be ignored, not just for sheep farming, but for the whole of agriculture, really, and some major changes going forward. We've had Brexit, so we're seeing farm policy now start to change and be derived from UK government and devolved governments rather than Brussels. And we'll see a lot of changes as a result of that, particularly in the economics of farming, I think. And we're already starting to see trade deals coming through. And whatever your view there is, things are certainly going to be different. We've mentioned a few times this evening about COVID, and I hope we're starting to see some real light at the end of the tunnel there. But I think the one thing with COVID in terms of agriculture, it has allowed agriculture really to demonstrate the importance of food in the UK and food production in the UK. So that whole debate around food security, and some of us, or several of us will remember before the lockdown and when Brexit was at its height, really, government suggesting farming didn't really matter at all. We could just import all the food, and certainly that view's changed. So if nothing else, from an agricultural point of view, that's a positive that's come out of COVID, and we need to retain that. And we know memories can be short in government, but we need to keep pushing that and the importance of food and how important farmers have been in keeping the shelves filled in the last 12 months. We also, I think, see COVID and its effect on public finances. There's an awful lot of money being borrowed to pay for all this. Agriculture in Scotland receives about £500 million worth of support. Yes, it's very well spent, but every penny spent in future, I think, will come under pressure. And worth remembering that 500 million of support represents 74% of the profitability of Scottish farming. So that's an issue going forward, and one that's not really being talked about because everybody is being focused on COVID. So, a lot going on, and allied to all that, of course, is the climate change debate, which has probably been pushed into the background a little bit, and net zero. But it's certainly not going to go away. And I think a lot of the organisations I talked to, and I was on a call with my opposite numbers in other banks with DEFRA the other day, it's very high up in the agenda, and it's going to come back, the net zero debate. We started talking about net zero 2050, then 2045. In England, we're talking about 2040. And of course, Morrison's now are talking about 2030. And I understand at least two other supermarkets will come out with the same challenge, the food on their shelves, they want to be net zero by 2030. Not very far away in farming terms. So it is a lot of change coming. I think the environmental aspect allied to those changes to the way farmers are supported in the future, and that policy change will be very important to us. We're probably going to see more change in the next 5 years than we've seen in the last 50 years when it comes through. I think it's fair to say I work in terms of both England and Scotland. Our farming book is fairly evenly split. In England, we're seeing farmers, I think, very much focused on those changes that are coming. Their support payments are already changing quite dramatically. Elms are being piloted already. So their policy, I think, is probably progressing more than the Scottish policy. And the one concern I would have there is that Scottish policy change, and change will come, actually gets truncated into a shorter period. And so change actually has to happen quicker when it comes. But of course, those challenges are nothing new for the sector. Personally, I'm very confident the industry can adapt and change and move and develop in terms of what's coming. It's always been very resilient and generally good at adapting when it has to. The trick is making those changes over time in what's a very long-term industry. So I think in terms of coming back to the theme for this evening, I think my message is very much about start planning now. What we know is there's likely to be less support money, there'll be less attached to what we produce, so we must make sure our businesses are as productive as we can make them, certainly. Understanding that future is important, and as I say, I think over the next 6 months we'll see a huge amount of talk about carbon reduction. So I would be suggesting, I think, to farmers to start thinking about having a carbon audit done, because I think that would be an essential part of the toolkit. We've been piloting those with some of our customers, and the good news in them, I think, is there's a lot of positives come out of them in terms of production efficiencies, cost savings that can be established, etc., alongside that carbon reduction. So as a bank, we spend a lot of our time looking at risk. We look at the sector very closely, and certainly I get asked. It's often in the press and often presents itself as being fairly challenged. And in the last 3 weeks, we've had the Australia trade deal being talked about. So, I'm called upon to explain what effect that might have on agriculture. And my view is very positive, really, in terms of the future of agriculture, but it will need to adapt. Sheep farming is a key part of that. I think the sheep industry is very dynamic. It's hard work. We know it's hard work, but it does very much have a future, and it's very much linked into the environment and the countryside we all enjoy. So I think we can see our way through these changes in a positive way. Productive farming will still be there at the end of it, but it's going to be different. So we as a bank will continue very much supporting our customers. As I say, it's a very key part of our business, but there is going to be a lot of change in the next 5 years, and it's important, I think, people start planning for that now and looking forward at where they can start to get information. As I say, perhaps things like carbon audits are a place to start. So positive about the industry, but plenty of challenge to come.
That's great. Thanks very much, Brian. If that was really, really interesting. So I think we'll just kick off with the questions if our panelists are ready for it. So the first one is from George Cormack, and he's asking, Robert and Hazel, a lot has been in the press about policy being driven by environmental issues. Have you made any plans for the future of your farming business?
Environmental.
Not really, no. What will be interesting, you'll probably will see it at Scott Sheep. We have a neighbouring estate that has a lot of hill land that has been, I would say, unproductive for a lot of years. And our farm would be, I would say, producing a lot of livestock from it. And I would like to know the difference with carbon and the environmental impact between these two farms. One farm that does very little and gets burnt maybe once every 10 years with a big fire, and our place that produces a lot of beef and lamb. And to see what it'd be interesting, as Brian was saying earlier, if we did do an audit, or if you could measure the environmental impact of these two places. One thing I would say is there's certainly a lot more wildlife on our side of the fence. It's quite noticeable that way. But as for environmental things, there certainly would be scope to do some planting, and we would be willing to look at that if there was some assistance or help.
It's something probably we don't have. When you see this, we don't have a lot of hedges. We have a lot of trees. They are actually very open, so it is something that we would probably like to do more for the environment, but for us as well. But it's been down the line, I'm afraid, at the moment. But it is something that, I think everyone has to. We're going to have to do something.
We're certainly not afraid of change if we needed to. But shelter belts would be something we would look at if there was a wee bit of help and incentive for us to do that.
Well, that was a really good answer. Thank you. We have another question from John File, and he's asking, what do the panelists think of DEFRA's retirement package? So 50 to 100k for outgoers to stop receiving the basic payment and remove themselves. Does Brian in particular think there is a demand for this scheme in Scotland, and at what financial level for a sheep farmer? And will different sectors need different sums? So that's like 3 questions in one. So you've got a package deal there.
Yeah, I think talking with DEFRA, and they're consulting on their scheme for England at the moment, which is effectively taking 2.5 years at today's rate of, or the consultation on is basically at today's payment rate of the payment, and rolling that up on the basis the farmer stands back from his farm, either gives up his tenancy. In England, they're going to allow that tenancy to be passed on to the next generation, so that would count as a break, or sell the land or move away from it. Interestingly, they were not discounting that if the farm was retained but went into environmental schemes entirely, so woodland or whatever, then that farmer may be able to continue there as well. So I think they are certainly from that side, and I suspect Scotland won't be a lot different. They're trying to be as flexible as they can. I think the challenge is really all it is doing is capitalising some of the next 5 years' money. It's not extra money effectively, it's just bringing some of it forward. And does it really create a big enough sum that would cause people to move off the farm? So I think that the consensus amongst us the other day was it is more likely to trigger generational changeover in tenancies and land being handed back to a landlord than it is to make real opportunity for new entrants into the sim. So I think, yes, it will generate or allow some people will take the opportunity to come out of the industry, but if the purpose there is to bring new people into the industry, that's where the challenge comes, I think, because it's probably not going to free up that amount of land that suddenly becomes available.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Robert and Hazel, do you have any thoughts on the scheme?
I don't know anything about the scheme, Jen, but I would say anything that could encourage young, fresh blood into the industry would be a good thing. Since we've moved here to Finlarg, we've had 3 young lads have helped us at various times, all very keen and enthusiastic, and I know they are finding it very difficult to get their foot on the ladder. You know, some are into a contract farming, contract farming agreement they're into now, and some did go home and just work on the family farm, but they have found it relatively difficult to, and they're very capable, talented young lads that we've had help us over the years, and it would be good if there was just less bureaucracy, you know, standing in their way to allow these guys to flourish.
It's very hard, even land prices are, you know, very high, so it's really difficult for young ones to gather up money unless they've got a very good banker, which fortunately we did. So it's very important to speak to your banker. But yeah, I think the price of land is the major thing for a lot of these young ones. It's just out, you know, to get money together to buy, it's impossible almost. So I don't know if letting people out of maybe the tenancy thing, yes, but I still think it's very difficult value for people to buy the land.
I think one of the areas that I've identified as a real problem is that, you know, young people can quite often get started in a small way, but it's how they can then get further, because as you say, land cost is a big barrier to them, cost of investment. One of the things I would say, I think, is agriculture is a bit odd in that there is this feeling that you want to be a farmer. Being a farmer and being involved in agriculture means practically being a farmer and having your own land, whether it be small or large or medium. And I think what the important thing is we have a dynamic industry, that there are opportunities for people to come and work in it and, you know, progress in whatever the job they want. And you know, if you wanted a career in grocery, you wouldn't go and buy a corner shop. You get an apprenticeship with Sainsbury's or something and work your way through there. So I think, you know, we've got a lot of young people who've come through the business and are working in the business, and that's great to see, and they enjoy agriculture. So I think that there are ways to get involved in agriculture without pure farming and see a way forward, but we need a dynamic industry to do that.
Yeah, Grace, do you have anything you want to add, or what your thoughts are on the proposal?
Yes, no, I would just agree with what Brian has just led off on there, that we're starting to get more of a dynamic industry, but it needs to be there, and the foundations are there. But to keep on going on with that, we need to learn from the past, and from that skill set that we've had, we're becoming much more environmentally aware, sustainably aware, and more productive aware and efficient. So if we can join all those together and incorporate parts of the DEFRA initiatives, it would be all for the better. But I don't necessarily think that it is the final answer. And succession planning, all of that comes into it. The carbon credits, for example, in terms of land availability, it's all against people, but there is going to be a certain time for people to win on this. So you need to have the confidence and the knowledge behind you to make sure that it works for you. And there is that opportunity there. It's just making sure that you have everything sorted out by talking to your banker, talking to other people who've done it before, and making sure that everyone around you is singing from the same hymn sheet.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. So we have another question that's following on from John's question from Ian McDougall. And he's asking, is the average age of a farmer a true reflection of farming and not just a number tied to the name on the bank account? Should support money be focused more on succession planning, be that with family or joint ventures with new entrants? So who wants to take that one first? Grace, how about you?
Yeah, I would say it'd be part of the answer, definitely. And I think there has been a stigma attached to that. You don't want to upset your father, your grandfather, whoever's been running the business, that you don't want to upset that hierarchy. And it's very hard to come in as a younger person sometimes to come in with new ideas because it's always been done that way. But certainly succession planning and also just using everything that's available yet.
I think that's right. And I think, as I say, I'm pretty clear that there is going to be a huge amount of change in the sector, and so it does provide that opportunity for generational change in businesses. We're going to need a lot of technology. We're going to need to use ag tech. We're going to start talking about methane units and carbon units and carbon credits, etc. So the industry is going to change, a lot of opportunity there, and I think, yeah, some people will take the opportunity just to stand back and let the next generation have a go at the same time. I think it's important we encourage that where we can.
Yeah, definitely. Robert, Hazel, do you have anything to add on that question?
Much the same. I think succession planning, yeah, but it's a difficult thing to maybe discuss with some families. And as for the average age of farmers, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Go to a market, have a look around. No idea.
In general, I would say sheep is a young man's business. You know, if you want efficiency, if you're working with sheep, it's still very physical and labour intensive. And once you get older, your efficiency does drop, I believe, and your enthusiasm drops to be an efficient sheep farmer. So yeah, it's very important that we keep the youth interested and try and help the best we can to get more young people involved in the sheep industry, definitely.
So following on from that then, Robert, what would be your advice, and equally Hazel and the other panellists as well, to somebody who wanted to get into sheep farming? What would be that one serious piece of advice that you would give them to do that?
Advice.
You've got to be willing to work hard.
Yeah.
You know.
It's not, you know, it's an outdoor job. Sheep are an outdoor enterprise, and certainly I'm getting to an age now that you do start to feel your sore bits more when you're working with sheep, and unless you can do it when you're younger, you're certainly not going to get the best out of it once you're, you know, later in your life anyway. Certainly hill sheep farming, maybe in the lower ground would be different, but in an upland situation as we are here, some of these cold, wet spring days when you're outside lambing ewes on the hill, you get the best out of it when you're younger, definitely. But it does take time to build up the knowledge and experience. So it's a difficult thing. By the time you're old enough and wise enough, you're past it whilst. But,
be able to run fast.
Yeah.
And always have a bit of string in your pocket.
Oh, thank you. Brian, what about you? What would be your one piece of advice to a new entrant?
Well, I think Robert summed it up really, but I think just taking it a step further than that, I think it's that production, it's being effective, it's being that good farmer and getting the right outputs from it. So it's that knowledge base and doing a good job. And I think that's the key thing. And in some ways, it's that balance between experience and the enthusiasm and the ability to actually do the job. It's an incredibly tough job. It's not for everyone, and so I think it is just that balance, but it is about having that, doing a good job, making sure you're doing a good job, benchmarking your business against others, and moving it forward.
Yeah, and Grace, what would your piece of advice be?
Yeah, aim big but start small, because you need to have the building blocks there before it all comes clattering down on you. So yeah, there's no harm in bringing in new ideas, but just remember that everyone might have done it before, and usually tradition has been built on things that work. So the older farmer down the road might be able to run rings around you in other ways and just working half as hard, but than you trying to go faster and quicker all the time with your new invention. So there's nothing wrong with trying new things, but just make sure that you're doing them right.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. So a question for Robert and Hazel. What has been your biggest challenge since you came to Overfin Larg? What was the biggest hurdle that you had to jump over?
I wouldn't say we've had a lot of hurdles. We've just had to keep our mind open and make the best of the farm we had, learn to have the right sheep for the farm and work the farm to suit the environment and the climate we're in. It is different farming here than the farm I was brought up on, and you've just to accept the changes. Spring comes later here, so you have to lamb a little later, and that's probably been the biggest challenge, is just accepting, although we've got a very good postcode, we're farming north of Dundee, the first impression people get is that you're in the heartland, the arable and fruit growing area. But we are an upland exposed hill farm, and it can be a very unforgiving place on a cold easterly wind. So that has probably been, the climate has probably been one of the biggest challenges we've had, certainly in the springtime.
Yeah, I think definitely the weather, some of the hardest times we've had with the first sort of lambing we had, we thought we were getting on great, and then fall of snow came, and the sheep and the stock weren't used to farm, we weren't used to farm. Yeah, but you just have to work around these things, and it was difficult moving stock from different farms as well for them to get used to the place. So yeah, there's been a few, but you just get over them, and we've got very good neighbours and people give us a help and advice, and yeah, just get on with it.
Good. So, Brian, I just wondered, you were touching on some of the net zero and the carbon issues and how they're going to be important going forward. Could you just elaborate on that slightly as to what that means for individual businesses?
Well, I think, as I said, I think probably what COVID has done is just slowed the pace of that down, and we've got food manufacturers driven by supermarkets very much looking at the carbon trail effectively. So what carbon is that food production carrying? You've got some of the large dairy companies like Arla being very proactive with it. Effectively, to find out what carbon is being created on farm, you need to do a carbon audit. That's potentially going to cost a few £100, but I would suggest it's well worth the investment, and some advice following on from that, and SRUC are very involved with that, and other organisations. So the base is there to get the numbers. It's then what do you do with it when you find out how much carbon you're producing, and I think that's where the consultant help and the general knowledge base of this is going to grow very quickly in terms of what can happen. Not all farms will be able to get to net zero, so it's going to be the industry as a whole that gets to net zero. I think we're very quickly going to see that our inputs and outputs will need to carry carbon tickets effectively. So when you buy a load of fertilizer, it will tell you how much carbon is with it and how much the transport that brought it to your farm. That's how far it's going to go, and that's not far away now because there's been these big commitments made. So it is going to change very quickly, but at farm level, I think it is all about what can I do to reduce my carbon? And at the end of the day, a lot of farmers will be saying, well, what's carbon? How do I produce it? It's all locked up in the soil or whatever. So I think we'll very quickly be educated on that. Undertaking carbon audits, which I I think are relatively straightforward and will come more to the fore. We did some research amongst our clients, and for instance, 40% of dairy farmers had done a carbon audit. So in parts of the industry, it is becoming the norm. And then you start to look at the mitigation you can put in place, both in terms of being a bit more productive, stopping doing some things, do a bit more of other things, deal with the fertilizer more, precision farming, using technology, etc. And those are the big wins, I think, out of that. And then you get into the more extensive areas such as planting trees, which is going to be a big part of the future as well. So it's a real smorgasbord, I think, of different effects, but we're going to have to learn the language of that very quickly. I don't think we've been doing these pilots now for 9 months. I don't think they're as scary as we thought they would be when we started. They're fairly straightforward. And I think we're in talking to those big food suppliers and certainly the supermarkets, that's the language they're talking now, and they want very much to be able to put food on the shelf that has that carbon audit with it, has that net zero effect. Morrison's have already come out and said 2030. They're driving down that route, and undoubtedly others will follow. So it's going to come very quickly. I think the productivity that can come out of that and some of the efficiency will come out of it. I think in some cases, land will be taken out of production. In England, we've got this target of increasing tree planting in the next 4 years by 250%, massive amount of trees to go in. Where they're going to come from, where they're going to go, no one quite knows, but it's certainly going to be incentivized. And it's going to be incentivized in a way, I think, that, as was said earlier, will effectively make it a nil cost to plant that. And then the other side of that is where you're creating carbon offsets, you're creating carbon credits, what value do those create? Because effectively it becomes another crop. If you've got surplus carbon credits, then there's going to be a market for those. So an awful lot of that, it's going to be a whole new area for us all to learn. I don't think it's quite as scary as perhaps it sounds at first sight, but it is going to become part of the lexicon of farming going forward, I think. But I would say, the one piece of advice is, and I know SRUC and others are doing it, is that carbon audit is a really good starting place.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. There is a question relating to this again from Ian McDougall. Is a growing knowledge and measurement in carbon on farm more likely to be a positive thing for UK farmers in supporting our place in the global food market, going to be more beneficial than we realise?
Me to cover that? So,
yeah.
I think global, most of the food we produce is consumed at home. And I think we've got a small number of very proactive supermarkets who can manage that. So I think the first port of call is very much going to be our UK consumers looking for that standard, and not necessarily in terms of how many carbon units are attached, but knowing that that food is being produced in a way that is carbon friendly and part of the net zero agenda. So I think that's first and foremost where it comes from. And then the more sophisticated markets, I think they will all look for that net zero effect. The challenge on the other side is food coming into the UK needs to have the same sort of standards. If that's what's expected of us, we need the supermarkets to play with a level playing field and not import food from elsewhere that doesn't carry the same requirements they put on UK farmers.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Does anybody, Grace or Robert or Hazel, do you want to add anything to the carbon discussion?
Yeah, I would just say that
I don't have any.
There's a lag there. Robert, you go on.
No, sorry, I was just to say I'm not very knowledgeable on the carbon situation. Yeah, I would like to know, we have majority of this farm is grass, and is growing a good crop of grass, putting carbon under the turf, is it collecting, if it's well managed grazing land, is that still storing carbon under the ground?
It's something we're going to have to do with the carbon audit just for our own. Yeah, it should have been something we should have done.
Well, I think it's very early days. I mean, the whole debate. We started this, and you suddenly. It's a really interesting subject, but it's quite a sad subject to get excited about, really, in some ways. But the methane emissions, how much methane emissions, and methane's a multiple of 10 on CO2 emissions. You mentioned there about permanent grassland and hill land effectively locking up carbon, which is correct. But of course, it can't lock any more carbon up because it's saturated. So any inputs you're bringing into your farm are adding to the carbon burden of your farm. So you need to be doing other things to offset what you're bringing onto the farm in terms of feed, fuel, and everything else. But I think that the lesson we've seen coming through from all this is it is there are lots of mitigants there, and most of those mitigants seem to involve saving money as well. So that's good. So things like, to offset that energy that's used to bring inputs into your farm and fertilizer, etc. Then if you're generating electric on your farm and using it yourself rather than exporting it, then that's a big plus, because that's actually your farm that's then utilizing that rather than just producing something that's exported somewhere else at less value. So there's a whole new world. There'll be a whole new cost base across this as well. So I think you need to pick partners in this carefully, but I think that there's some good work being done. And I think the science is effectively there. It's how agriculture gets its head around it and moves it forward. And the whole of British industry is in the same position. So if you're producing cars, producing widgets, or you're a pack house for something, the supermarkets and the customers are all asking the same question: how much carbon are you producing and what are you doing about it?
Grace, you wanted to come in as well?
I think an important point to raise here is that the consumer is always getting more interested in what we're doing, and the more we can do to try and encourage that is the better. But we need to make sure that the facts and figures are there and they're not stacked against us. I mean, lockdown has been the best thing ever to get us reconnected with that consumer, but they need to be educated better, and we just can't rely on having a superior animal welfare credentials, because that simply isn't going to be enough going forward. I mean, in terms of carbon audits, the Farm Advisory Service are starting to give out them, and the advisor costs can be refunded. You can check their website for resilience funding, and sustainability and carbon audits are all included in that. So, I mean, there's things out there where you can get carbon audits. It's not just this big thing where it's going to cost you a fortune and you'll never see the rewards back out of it. And it's something that we will need to be focusing on going into the future. I mean, NSA, we have our Breakfast Club webinar at the start of June, and it's going to be focusing on all things carbon and all things that aren't just down to carbon audits. So if you're interested in that side of things, just make sure that you tune into that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. I was just going to tell everybody about the webinar. So that's next week if anybody's interested. So a total change of topic now. The next question from an anonymous attendee. Scottish sheep is a year away. What one change would you like to see within the sheep industry by the time Scottish sheep happens next year? So I'll go to the hosts first and ask them.
The sun to shine.
Stop raining.
Yeah.
Probably they'd asked us that last year. We would have said for the increase of prices, but lamb's doing very well at the moment. Sheep in general are doing well. Yeah, for the weather to improve here anyway would be good. Sorry. That's about it.
Brian, what about you?
I think it would be good to see that that relatively better price that we've seen in quite a few sectors, beef and some of the other areas as well, sustained for another 12 months. So it's not just around COVID or anything else, and we keep getting support from supermarkets going forward, and their offering isn't all about price, and they haven't had pushback from the consumer. Effectively, the consumer has been happy at times to pay a little bit more, and I think another prolonged period of sustainable pricing would be good for the industry generally, not just sheep, but that side. As we go into this period of change, it'll help for planning and provide some money for further investment as well, I think.
Yeah, and Grace, what do you want to see by then?
By this time next year, I'd like to think that we'd all have a better idea of where we're heading, and not this kind of middle ground where we don't know what's going to happen. England's going to do, Wales are going to do, what everyone else is going to do. So a bit more direction in terms of change, and also just a bit of brighter outlook. I mean, it's there for us. We just need to make sure that it happens.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. We all need a bit more clarity going forward, specifically where Scottish Government and their plans for the industry are headed. It would be, the sooner we know, the better, really, for everybody. Grace, you mentioned there that there was somebody had their hand up. Do you want to bring them in just now if they have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mary, you're here if you want to ask your question. You're on mute though.
It was to go back to the climate situation. I just feel that farming hasn't got a loud enough voice compared to forestry. And, you know, for example, the forestry have loads of grants for, you know, purchase of ground, whereas there isn't that in farming. And there's never any figures given for the forestry on the machinery used and all that sort of thing. You know, it comes up in farming, but it never seems to crop up in the forestry situation. And I think it's totally biased against farming, that forestry can, you know, offset carbon so well compared to farming. And I think we should really push the farming side of it far more. So that's all.
Yep, no, I think that's a very good point that you've made, Mary, and the issues of forestry going forward is certainly going to be something that's going to be fairly high up on NSA's agenda. There's quite a debate around the planting of trees and government targets, etc. So it's something we'll be paying attention to.
I think it's a very good point made, Mary. I think the other thing around that is that forestry, you mentioned that there's a certain amount of muck and magic around it, and it gets all the pluses, but none of the negatives are mentioned. But I think that will change. I think that the one challenge we may have is how much land forestry takes away from productive farming in terms of livestock. There's already a market appearing, I think, where people are buying perhaps poorer land for trees, but that land would traditionally have had sheep and beef on. And so there does need to be care taken in this massive expansion in trees that I think all governments see as a quick way of offsetting carbon production, and that it is balanced out. And I think what will sort that out effectively is this potential market that will emerge in carbon credits, because then there will have to be a true story given to that forestry and the economics of forestry to go with that. So I think it will become clearer, but there is the potential there that you know, forestry overtakes everything else for a while, and we get some investors involved in that area that perhaps don't have the long-term values we might have as being involved in farming.
But basically, you know, the government need to be shown how, you know, we need to be more self-sustaining in our food production. The more land that goes towards tree production, then the less, you know, the less potential we have for producing food. And importing food is only, you know, costing air miles, etc., and more carbon production. So, you know, we have a very strong point to push, and it needs to be pushed hard.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think it is. I think as we start to run down the road of identifying how much carbon farming is actually producing and the good it does and the offset it can do, I think those numbers are very quickly going to change the debate, and it won't all be about methane from cattle. it'll become a much more balanced argument. But we've got to work very hard, and the farming organisations and people like ourselves have got to work very hard to get that message out there in terms of that side, because you can see in the numbers we've got now, it's sustainable in terms of having a productive farming industry. It would be much worse if we got to the stage where we're importing beef from South America, where there is no thought there in terms of carbon reduction or net zero. In fact, just the reverse there. So there's work to be done, and I think we've got to get on the front foot in terms of shouting about the positives that agriculture does there in terms of that, both to government and to the public as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that the forestry and that side of inventory is much more advanced than our own in terms of grassland. But I would like to think that the World Climate Convention in Glasgow later on in November will help to establish a few more things that are factual and science-based rather than just an idea, and that we can get our inventory up to scratch to help with that in the future.
We can hope. But I think we, as an industry, we need to keep working very hard to keep shouting very loud about all the good things that we do. And Robert and Hazel's farm, audit or no audit, will do a fantastic job for the environment. And there'll be lots of other farms like that. And we need to make sure we shout about it. And it's not just the potential negatives that are seen in agriculture. And I think there is a mood swing now in terms of people understanding a bit more about food, and certainly the supermarkets, I think, are more aware, but we do have to be able to stand up and be counted for what the actions we take.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point that you're making, Brian, and hopefully NSA Scotland can contribute to that for the sheep sector going forward. So we have time for just one more quick question. So I'm going to ask the panelists, what is it that you're most looking forward to at Scott Sheep next year? What part of the day is going to be the highlight for you? So Robert and Hazel, what are you looking forward to?
Saying goodbye.
No offense taken. Oh dear. What about you, Brian?
I think after being sat here largely for the last 15 months now, I'm very much looking forward to the crack and getting out and about again, really, and living and breathing this. I spend my life looking at numbers on a page, and there's nothing better than seeing the real work that goes on the farm and what actually makes things happen and tick. And I think these events are great because they demonstrate all that's good in our industry, the very best that's good. And the enthusiasm for it. For a day we forget about all the negatives and look at the positives and ride round the farm and talk the business, and it's what we all do. We live and breathe and what we look forward to.
Yeah, and Grace, what about you?
Much the same as Brian, just showcasing just what exactly our industry can do, and the fantastic venue as Overfinlarg will be, and just gathering everybody together with a similar interest and getting that conversation going to try and progress things, because there's nothing better than seeing something and trying to bring it home to do and just making things better for yourself. So yeah, just the whole event scene is just the fabric of our society, so we need to keep it going, and the better we can do, it'll be for everybody.
And there'll be plenty to talk about by then.
Yeah, definitely. And it'll be nice to see humans actually, physically there rather than over a computer screen as well. So I think I'll just thank you all for joining the webinar tonight, and our speakers for giving up your time. It's much appreciated, and also everybody that's tuned in and asked questions. Hopefully we'll be able to do something like this face to face beforehand, but if not, we'll see you at Scott Sheep next year. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.